it's Fred at Archibald's. Welcome. It's the 18th of May, and as you can see by looking around here, we're in full bloom. This is a really special time of the year, and we'll talk more about bees and pollination a little bit later. But for the moment, I have strategically placed myself in the midst of the only original trees left on this farm from the first ones that were planted in 1968. There's just a handful of these old trees. Most of them have been cut down and replaced for a variety of reasons, but these old girls are still here, still producing apples that we use to make wine. And we will be talking more about winemaking a little bit later too. But these trees are what we would call, in this day and age, a semi-dwarf system. Not too many trees to the acre, maybe about 100. Our newer planting that we did this year, and we'll have a quick look at that later, was around 700 trees to the acre. So a lot of things have changed, variety mix has changed, but these trees survive and they'll continue to be part of our winemaking operation here. Most of these apples now are grown for processing. So Archibald Orchards began in 1968 when these trees went in the ground. It was a hobby, kind of a big hobby as the years went by, but my dad used to pile all 5 of us into the back seat of an old Ford, and we drive up here from Vineland. Weekend farmers is what we were. There was a lot of work. Not everybody loved it. I would have been very surprised when we planted these trees when I was 14 years old to see myself at 68 still out here and still having a good time. But anyways, most of my brothers and sisters scattered over time. Sandy and I kind of stayed close. We were married by the time this orchard really got established and started producing a lot of apples, so we were still partly involved with my dad. But things were not to go exactly as planned. My grandfather, who was a retired high school teacher from Whitby, passed away in the mid-70s, so he didn't really see things get up and running. And as it turned out, my dad didn't live that much longer. He passed away in 1981, and at that point in time, Sandy and I, with a couple of young kids and a couple of fledgling careers off the farm, had to make a big decision. What we were going to do. What were we going to do? Somebody had thrown us this great big ball, and we were trying to catch it and figure out where it was going to go next. So we decided, after a little bit of debate, that we were going to make this a full-time job for both of us. So we left our jobs in 1983. We were all ready to go, ready to ship our first crop to the packer. And guess what? Mother Nature intervened. Dark cloud with a silver lining is the way we like to tell the story now, but we had a hailstorm in 1983 that took us right out of the wholesale market. So in order to salvage the crop and try and salvage our dreams, we decided to try pick your own. And that, my friends, is the beginning of the story of the modern Archibald Orchards. We had a lot of apples here, but the only way we had to market them at that point in time was through the wholesaler. And in addition to the problems with the weather, there were lots of other problems in the early 80s. Money was very expensive to buy. The wholesale market was kind of doing one of these down the drain things. So we decided, let's get more creative. Let's sell it, pick your own. Let's see what we can do with this damaged crop. And we were off and running. And as fate would have it, the very next year, if we weren't sure that this is what we wanted to do, we had another hailstorm. So in 1984, we also sold a partially damaged crop, and by then we were hooked. That's how it really all began here. And over the course of the many years since we began the Pick Your Own, the orchard has changed too. There's been a lot of physical changes. We're still sitting on one of the best sites in Durham region. My dad was a soil scientist, and he knew what he was looking for when we found this site here north of Bowmanville, and we're still benefiting from his good judgment back then. But we even though we do have a few of these older trees, we've been planting and replanting. My goal most years is to plant 400 or 500 trees, or about an acre every year, stay on top of the varietal mix, and use all the new techniques that are coming up all the time to make this a great orchard. So there's kind of an introduction for you folks. While we're in this area, we're going to do a little pan around, and Jesse's going to help me here. I'm going to go out of frame, but I'm going to keep talking, and I'm going to show you right next door to these old trees, we have got some trees that we had just planted this spring. 3 weeks ago, Jesse and I were out here with my homemade tree planter, and we were planting 500 new Idared trees. This is one of the varieties that we like to use for wine, and all of our Idared trees were getting quite elderly. So this year we finally got back to planting some of those. They're just started now. These trees will all get a post this year. As soon as they're delivered, we're going to paint the trunk of the trees to protect them from a number of things, and on we go. So let's move to another location here, folks, and we'll talk a little bit more about the topic of the day, which is bees and pollination. So thank you. See you soon. Hey everybody, it's Fred again, and I've placed myself as close as I safely can to our collection of rented beehives here in the orchard. They're placed in one location and they work from there to move across the orchard. The reason why we have those and why we depend on pollinators in general, whether they're rented honeybees like those or wild bees that live in the orchard, is that apple trees are not self-pollinating. So what that means is a variety like Honeycrisp that I'm standing beside has to, in order to have a fruit, it has to have pollen transferred from another variety. And that goes across the board. We grow 12 different varieties here, and one of the reasons is because of pollination. We want lots of crossover. So rented bees, local bees who live here, we do as best a job as we can to maintain a habitat for the bees who live in the orchard year-round. There are things we do about cutting grass or not cutting grass that really help develop a healthy habitat for them. So that's part of modern apple growing, and we're happy that we've been able to work with a researcher and nail down some of those practices the last few years. This is a really important time for the apple crop. We only get one chance a year. Blossom time is short, and I've been here a long time, over 50 years watching blossom time, and rarely has there been a year where we've got such a beautiful stretch of weather that hit right at blossom time. This is the 18th of May, and if anybody remembers what it was like last week, it felt like we were living on the shores of James Bay. So we got really lucky this year. Things are happening very fast, and whatever we did this year to deserve this, I'd like to do it again next year. So this has been great. Okay everybody, we're going to go for a little walk along the end of some of these rows. One of the things you'll notice as we walk along is that not all the trees have the same amount of bloom on them. Some of them are just don't crop as well as others, but there's also a difference between the timing of blossom. So when we lay out the orchard, one of the things we have to think about is complementary pollinators. Which varieties should be next to which varieties, so that they're all open and the bees can do their job at the same time. If we had a very late blooming variety next to a very early blooming variety, we might not get the result we want. So that's all part of the thinking that goes on when you're laying out an orchard. The varieties that we've walked by include some Honeycrisp. These ones right here are Macintosh, and as you can see, they're what we would probably call an early bloomer. Certainly they are this year. On a year where the heat is a little more consistent and not cold and then hot like we've had this year, the varieties tend to run together a little bit better. But this year we've noticed that the early ones are early and the later ones are a little bit later, but we're catching up. As long as the petals don't fall off these before they come out on the other trees, then we'll probably still have a pretty good chance of getting some cross-pollination. These two rows here are Cortland. They're kind of a droopy tree, but they bloom about the same time as Mac, so that's a good strategy. And then we have 3 rows of Ambrosia here. This is a nice popular late season apple, one of the 12 that we grow. And right next to Ambrosia, we have 3 rows of Gala. So this is kind of a pollination-driven layout here. It also gives our pick your own customers a chance to find different choices within a short amount of space. So it all works out pretty well. And I'm going to get Jess to pan around one more time. We looked at the newly planted trees last year. These trees here are the same variety, Ida Red, and you can see that they've had their post put beside them. They're tied to the post and they stay like that for life. These have a few blooms on them this year. We probably won't let them grow any apples, but by this time next year we might be ready to actually start picking something from these young Ida Red trees. Ida Red happens to be one of the varieties that we really like for winemaking. Ida Red and Macintosh are #1, and then it just kind of goes down from there. So when we go into the winery, and I'm getting kind of thirsty, so I think we should do that soon, we'll talk a little bit more about which varieties make good wine and what some of the processes are that we have to go through in order to operate a winery. So see you soon. Hey everybody, we're here in the winery and we're ready to talk a little bit about wine. And it's interesting that today, the day you're going to be watching me, is actually National Wine Day. So timing's perfect. A lot of times probably the most common question I get when I'm standing here behind the bar is, why did you start making wine? How did you learn how to do all this? Well, the story is simple and complicated. I started making wine because we started making fresh cider. And we bought a little press, and we used to sell 20, 30 jugs on the weekend, but either we'd run out, which would always seem like a lost opportunity, or we'd have a few jugs left over. And when we had them left over, we had limited choices. We could just water the flowers with it, because it really doesn't keep that long. Fresh cider has a limited shelf life. So, because I liked wine, and I was on a very limited budget, I thought, why don't I turn this into something I can use? So a little bit more of a value-added thing. At that point, it was just for personal use, but I learned how to turn freshly made cider into interesting fruit wines. We tried different varieties. We certainly learned a lot of lessons about which ones worked better than others. And, before we knew it, we were off and running. We were applying for a license, and in 1997, which is 25 years ago now, we opened Archibald Orchards Estate Winery. So, there's the brief history there. Our current wine list is basically sitting in front of me right now, and I've got it divided into 3 basic categories. This one over here with the gold tops is ciders. This one here in the middle is called dessert wines, and we've got an interesting range, including a new one called apple caramel. And over here, we've got a range of table wines. So these are still wines a little closer to what you might expect from traditional wines, but still made from apple and other fruits grown here in Ontario, except grape. So in the cider category, and this has become a really strong one lately, we've got 2 apple varietals. One called Hardcore is a very dry one. Our best seller in the cider group is the one we call the original, or just plain hard cider. That was the first one we made about 1 year into the winery business. We bought the equipment we needed to make a product like this and put bubbles in it. Then we evolved over the years, kept adding different fruits, different blends. We've got a cherry blend, a Montmorency cherry blend called Hard Cherry. Hard Strawberry Lime. This is our newest one. We just introduced this spring, and it's really, really good. We also have one that we call Pink, and this is Sparkling Apple Cranberry. Hard Ginger. 3 or 4 years ago, we decided to try something with a spice, and the Hard Ginger was a great hit. So very interesting, great with Asian food. Lots of ways to enjoy that one. Hiding in the back row here, we've got Hard Currant, and we've got Hard Raspberry. And I just reminded myself about the equipment we needed to do this, and we used the same stuff we bought 25 years ago right up until this spring, but we bought a brand new bottling line that really made life so much quicker and easier, and I think we should go back and have a look at it. So follow me into the back for a minute. Okay, everybody, we're in the back room, and we're going to show you how we bottle cider. Now, everything that we call a cider is sparkling. So we have a carbonator and a carbonating bottling line here. This is the brand new piece of equipment I was talking about that we're very proud of, and it's really made life a lot easier here for Jess and I. So I'm going to start up this little machine. We'll be doing what I would call a very dry cider today, just for demonstration purposes. The bottle gets put on here. There's actually 8 spaces on the machine where you can add bottles, and while they're going around, they fill up not only with liquid, but also with the CO2 that gives the product the sparkle. Once they're filled, we take them off again, and it becomes just a little bit of a robotic exercise here. Put one on, take one off, put a cap on it, and we're done. So ciders, whether they're alcoholic or not, run through this machine, fills under pressure, adds CO2, and that's the secret, the magic behind sparkling cider. Welcome back to the bar, everybody. We're going to talk for a minute or two about the part of the wine list that's not sparkling ciders. And we could probably start with the apple varietals. This was a big part of our wine list when we first started, and at this point in time we have 5 apple varietals. There's a very dry Ida Red and Macintosh. There's also one made with Silken, Wild Pink, and the ever popular Honeycrisp. So these are all have their own distinctive flavors, and we've chosen them for that. There are apples that we did not choose because they might be great eating apples, but they don't make very good wine. So that's one of the things we learned by trial and error over the years. So these are the ones that we really like, and these are quite popular if you're just looking for an apple wine. These have higher alcohol than the ciders, and they don't have the sparkle. The other wines on the list right now include a range of blends. We've got a blend with raspberry, strawberry rhubarb, black currant, what else have we got here? Cranberry, and an interesting wine that's not made with apples at all. It's made with black cherries and black currant. So it gives kind of a reddish wine experience. So it's a nice rounded wine list. We've learned by experience that if the wine list is too long, that kind of starts to work against you. So we make sure that the 10, 15 wines that we have on our wine list are wines that we really think are the very best, and anything that's mediocre just doesn't last very long. So one more category to talk about here is the dessert wines, and these have been with us excuse me, since day one. Our most popular was also our first dessert wine. It's called Spiced Winter Apple. Tastes like an apple pie in glass. We've got one called Canadian Maple, made with locally made maple syrup. Sweet Peach is a nice one in the semi-sweet category. Similarly, Royal Raspberry, a raspberry style dessert wine. And the king of the castle right now is our newest. This was only released a month or so ago. Very quickly has become our bestseller, and it's called Caramel Apple. So again, this is another little category. The wine list is broken down into 3 categories. Changes a little bit each year. This year I was pretty excuse me, ambitious and busy, and we added 3 new wines. The caramel, the strawberry, and the wild pink were all brand new this year. That doesn't happen every year, but once in a while we like to freshen up the list. When we add a new one, we usually take one off, and we don't talk about that anymore. So there are wines that have dropped over the years, but basically there's a good solid range here that gives you a good idea of different styles, different sweetness, different fruit, and it's really a lot of fun being a fruit winemaker. If you're making grape wine, you're kind of tied by tradition. There's thousands of years of experience behind making the perfect Chardonnay or the Merlots. This, nobody knows exactly what an apple raspberry wine should taste like, but my theory is it doesn't really matter what your expectations are as long as it tastes good. So everything's driven by taste, food matching experience, and it's really maybe a little bit like the Wild West, but it's really an awful lot of fun to work in this kind of environment. So as you can tell, all this talking has made my throat a little dry, so I'm going to wrap up with you here today by opening a bottle, and I've just popped the cork on a nice sparkling bottle of strawberry lime, and sorry you can't join me on this, but I'm going to use this glass to toast all of you and hope that you have enjoyed our presentation today. Thank you, Jesse, for being my long-suffering technical person. There's a lot to putting together videos like this and trying to patch it together. So to you, to Jesse, cheers. Have a great day, everybody, and I'll be around for questions.